Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Peter approached Jesus and asked him, Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus answered, I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a huge amount. And since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, all his property, payment of the debt. And that the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full. Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go, forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants, who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized one of his fellow servants and started to choke him, demanding, Pay back what you owe. Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, Be patient with me, and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he had his fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant as I had pity on you? Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives your brother from your heart. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
All right, I want to do the same thing we did last week, and I want to have every youth age 9 to 18 to come up here and sit on the steps of the sanctuary, just like we did last week, between the ages of 9 and 18. Okay? I think I see some Hoffmans back there between the age of 9 and 18. I'd really hate to have to excommunicate you guys for not coming up here. All right. What about people in the cry room? Anybody age 9 to 18? All right. All right. So, first of all, if you didn't hear last week was the first week of Ari, and we had, I think it was like a record attendance. We had over 100, and it was like 114 people that came. Pretty amazing. We're putting a lot of effort into religious education and youth ministry this year. We have 3 full-time youth ministry interns. We have over 10 Wabash students, right, who are working in youth ministry. And we have lots of catechists and lots of parishioners. I'm extremely grateful to all the catechists for all the time that they're giving to religious education. All right, now you guys up here. Carson, can you go ahead and bring up the picture, please? All right, so last week, guys, I talked to you about Blessed Carlo Acutis. Today I want to talk to you about another saint. Can you make some room for Mr. Carson there? All right. Carson's still waking up this morning, so, all right. So, and can you show the congregation too? I know that I've talked about this saint before, so some of you might be a little bit familiar with her story, but I know that some of you are not, okay? So, guys, this is one of my favorite saints, okay? Her name is Blessed Chiara Badano, right? Chiara Badano. Chiara it's an Italian name. She grew up in Italy. Her nickname was Luce, which is Italian. Does anybody know what that means in Italian? Luce? Any of you ever read Harry Potter? What does Luce mean? Haley? Light. Very good. All right. Haley, one of our budding Italian scholars at St. Bernard. Okay? So her nickname was Luce. So many of her friends called her. She's a saint. She was born in, or she died in 1990, which is the same year that I was born, actually. So kind of interesting connection there. But typically when we think about the saints, typically we think about people from a really long time ago. People from the Middle Ages or hundreds of years ago. We think about priests and nuns, right? Obviously, she wasn't a priest. She wasn't a nun. She lived 30 years ago. She died in 1990. And I wanted to share the story about her today because I think it's a really beautiful story. So, Blessed Kiara, she was an only child. Are any of you only child? All right, a couple of you. Yeah, right. So she was an only child, and growing up, she had some struggles. Right, and sometimes it's kind of tough being an only child. Right, not to have siblings to commiserate with. Right, and she struggled in school sometimes. She failed math class when she was in high school. Have any of you ever failed math class and want to admit to the whole church right now? So she failed math when she was in high school. So she was a pretty good student, but she struggled with some areas. Kiara, she was actually when she was 9 years old. How many of you are 9 years old right now? Right, a couple of you. Right. When she was 9 years old, she went to this retreat hosted by a movement called the Focolare movement, and it was basically the turning point in her life. She fell in love with God. She really loved her faith, and so she was very devout the rest of her childhood. In fact, when she was in school, sometimes people would call her Sister Kiara because she was so Catholic. But as you can tell, obviously Kiara, she was just a normal-looking girl. She's very beautiful. She looks like somebody who could have been right out of Crawfordsville High School. Looks like many of you. And Kiara, when she was 16 years old, she was playing tennis. Any tennis players here? You guys like to play tennis? All right, we should play tennis sometime. I love playing tennis. All right. So when she was 16 years old, she was playing tennis, and all of a sudden she had this really sharp pain in her shoulder. And because of the pain in her shoulder, she dropped her racket, and they had to take her to the hospital. And she actually never played tennis again. Because when she went to the hospital, she found out that she had a very rare form of bone cancer. Any of you ever known somebody with bone cancer? Bone cancer is a very painful disease. Bone cancer is one of the worst kind of cancer you can get. And she was diagnosed with this when she was 16. And being a young, courageous girl that she was, right, she was taking a lot of different treatments for the disease. And she tried really hard to survive and fight the disease. And after about a year of treatments, the doctors informed her that none of the treatments were really working. And she was dying. And so when she found that out, she made a prayer to God, and she said, Jesus, if this is what you want for me, then this is what I want. And she spent the rest of her life preparing for her death. But as she was dying, she was in a hospital with a bunch of other children, teens, other people who had terrible diseases. And so she realized that even though she was in a lot of pain herself, she needed to do something to help the other people who were in the hospital. And so she basically took it upon herself to look after the other teens and children who were in the hospital with her. She would go for walks with them in the hallways and talk with them, even though it caused her an extreme amount of pain because her bones were disintegrating. And her parents would beg her. They would say, Kiara, you can't be walking so much. You need a rest. And Kiara would tell her parents, she would say, I'll be able to rest soon, indicating when she was going to die. Kiara, as you can see in this picture, this is when she was 16, right? So this is before she had her illness. But you can actually go home and look it up on the internet. Pictures of her as she was dying. She lost all of her hair. And that was very painful. But every time her hair would fall out, she would lift it up to the ceiling and she would say, God, I offer this to you. And as Catholics, we believe that when we suffer, when we experience pain, we can offer it up for other people. And it can bring about salvation of the world. How many of you ever heard somebody say, offer it up? Offer it up means like whenever you're in pain or struggling, you should offer up to God and unite it with the suffering of Jesus. So that's what she would do as her hair was falling out. As she was preparing to die, she knew that it was going to be really hard for her parents. And so she started doing secret things for her parents. Like, for example, she wrote a Christmas card to her parents, and she put it up in their attic, so that after she had passed away, and they had their first Christmas, they would find a note from their daughter. During the last week of her life, she was preparing for her funeral, and she told her mom that her last desire, her last wish was that when she was buried, that she would be buried in a wedding dress. You know why she would want to be buried in a wedding dress? It's because she realized that when she died, it would be her wedding in heaven. She would belong completely to God. She would be His. So she has to be buried in a wedding dress. When she was finally passing away, her last words to her mother was sitting by her deathbed, and she was obviously really torn up and sad. And Kiara said, "Mom, be happy. I'm happy." She knew that she was going to meet God. Pretty amazing story, right? Beautiful. You know, again, sometimes when we think about saints, we think about people who are like super holy and they spend all their days in church, or they're like these amazing theologians. Kiara was just a normal teenager, just like any of you. But she loved God. She looked out for other people. You know, sometimes when we talk about our faith in God, sometimes people, they doubt faith in God. And a lot of times people say things like, well, you know, I don't believe in God because God doesn't answer my prayers. Or because He let this or that thing happen to me. Kiara could have easily done that when she was diagnosed with cancer, but she didn't do that at all. Instead, she embraced it. She said, all right, how can I use this for other people? How can I take my own experience, my own suffering, my own pain, and how can I do something for others? Kiara also understood that to be holy, right, it doesn't mean that we pray all the time, right, or that we're always reading the Bible, even those are good things to do. She realized that holiness means that we try to make our life a gift to God. Something beautiful for God. You know, I shared with all of you last week that I really think that you guys in your schools and in your clubs and on your sports teams, you guys are the most important people in our church. Because all these people sitting on the pews right now, most of them, when they go to work or when they interact with family and neighbors, when people become adults, their lives kind of settle down. They become more mature and wise. But as you guys know, I'm sure especially those of you who are older, like in high school, some of your peers are starting to get into things that could really have a negative impact on their life. Things that could really ruin their life. So they need you to look out for them, to be an example. I actually have a really good friend. She lives over in Ohio. So I don't know if you guys have been to Ohio before. It's directly east of Indiana. But she's really Catholic now. She really loves God. She loves her faith. She's got a few different children. She's married. And she told me that when she was in high school, she really struggled with anxiety and depression and loneliness. Maybe some of you guys struggle with that too. Maybe you know other people that do. She said that sometimes she even thought about hurting herself because she was so depressed. And she said that the changing point in her life was when a few of her friends from school, they invited her to their church youth group. She went to their youth group and she learned that no matter how hard her life was, she was still God's creation. And that she could never uncreate herself. That she was going to live forever, either in heaven or in hell. And so she never hurt herself like that. She told me that the reason she's alive today is because she had friends who invited her to the youth group. Never underestimate the ability you guys have to impact your peers, the people in your school. This year at St. Bernard, we're making our RE classes, they're not just classes. So I know some people have, maybe some of you have even said this, maybe in years past you came to RE or you came to youth group and you said like, man, I didn't really get much out of it. Well, you get out of it what you put into it. And we put in a ton of effort, I myself put in a ton of effort preparing RE for you this year, and youth group for you this year, so that'll be a formative experience for you. It's not just going to be you showing up to class and getting lectured, right, on some teaching about the faith. You're going to be split up into groups with your peers, and you're going to talk about how you yourself can grow in the faith. How you yourself can further the faith in your school. How you yourself are looking at people around you in your school and in your friend groups who need you. And what are you doing to look out for them? It will be worth your while. And if you don't think it's worth your while, don't quit. Make it better. What can you do to make RE to make it better? That all of us would be inspired by this story of Blessed Kiara, and that each of you would want to live like her. What are you going to do for God? What's going to be your gift to God? You guys can all go back to your pews now.